Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time we're reacting to Chapter 2 of the Battle of Cannae 216 BC by History March, and this is part 12 of their Hannibal series on the Second Punic War. So yeah, if you haven't seen my reaction to part 1 of the Battle of Cannae and the other earlier episodes of the Hannibal series, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. The usual disclaimer when I react to historical videos: if I don't show so much as what is considered a proper reaction, is is probably obvious that I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause a video to quickly give my input or ask any curious questions will be answered in the comments below, hopefully. So yeah, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to History March. They're one of the best, in my opinion, they're one of the best history channels on YouTube among many. So and they still deserve the support of everyone that's a fan of their channel. So anyway, without wasting much more of your time, let's get this up on the screen and let's get into this.
Hey guys, the Battle of Cannae has 3 chapters.
Turn down my speaker.
If you missed the previous one, you can find it here.
Feel free to check that out. It was a great episode. 50 kilometers north of Cannae. I just want to say sorry if I butcher any pronunciations of any of these should I say Italian or Latin names, or any Carthaginian or any names that are not English. So I could have worded that better. So yeah, and I do love the effect of the rain, like in a bird's eye view. I do like that effect.
Some distance north of Cannae,
oh, that is such a good
Roman
effect.
host lumbered forward through the plains of Apulia when the forward element spotted Hannibal hastily abandoning his camp just ahead. The enthusiastic Roman vanguard rushed forward. The pursuit lacked organization, but
yeah,
for once
they're a
they
bit
caught
too
the
enthusiastic.
Carthaginian general off guard, and they were not.
Yeah, I was about to say that sounded like they were a bit too enthusiastic.
Not about to allow him time to consolidate. But while Hannibal's standard did leave the camp, the Carthaginian general was in fact lurking in the forest nearby.
Ambush.
He lured the Romans into an ambush yet again, despite their extensive scouting efforts. Panic gripped the Romans, and it seemed like another disaster was afoot. But Consul Varro quickly rallied the troops and reformed the lines, managing to beat back the Carthaginians.
Wow.
Hannibal committed significant forces in an effort to destroy the Roman vanguard and shatter the morale of the Republic's army in yet another ambush. But the legionaries he met on that rainy morning showed the kind of determination he hadn't faced before. And as a fan of our channel, you should definitely check out our friends over at Curiosity Stream, my personal favorite streaming service that features thousands of documentaries. So be supporting our channel.
Feel free to check out the sponsor. Wow, that's the first time I've heard about the Romans surviving an ambush without routing or being completely wiped out. So it looks like the tables are finally turning, but then again, Hannibal could turn the tables yet again in a single notion. Probably not the right word to use, but still.
It's late July 216 BC. As the Roman column approached, word reached Paulus and Varro that the supply depot at Cannae fell into Carthaginian hands. The two consuls were alarmed by the news, knowing that Hannibal now had the resources to camp throughout the winter with little need to forage or pillage the surrounding area for supplies. This would keep the Carthaginians sheltered and rested, and would undoubtedly help Hannibal maintain high morale among the troops over the coming months. Meanwhile, Paulus and Varro were aware that, with their logistics disrupted, maintaining and supplying their vast army in the field would present numerous problems. From their perspective, a well-supplied Hannibal could now, in theory, try to play for time and prolong the war well into next year, which would give him plenty of opportunities to gain political points and successfully persuade Rome's allies in southern Italy to join him. For the Roman leadership, the thought of a possible cascade of defections on their peninsula was unacceptable. Hannibal had to be dealt with. However, while surveying the battlefield, disputes began over where to fight the planned battle. To the south lay Cannae on a line of hills, with undulated land beneath the hillsides, and a very flat plain north of the river Aufidius. In ancient times, the river itself is suspected to have had a different course, which ran further away from the hills, and the area surrounding it was mostly treeless, cultivated, open country, much like today. Paulus wasn't pleased with the ground, arguing that the flat terrain favored Hannibal's more numerous and better cavalry, expressing his preference to move the camp into the hills to the west, where the more broken ground would be more suited to infantry and would restrict cavalry maneuvers. Varro disagreed, correctly pointing out that the legions performed best on fairly open ground, expressing his willingness to give battle even in the open country north of the river, despite Hannibal's superiority in cavalry, but arguing that deploying the army in the undulated terrain south of Aufidius would also suit the Roman infantry, whilst the river and the hills would restrict any extensive Carthaginian cavalry maneuvers on the flanks. Both consuls were clearly concerned about the mobility of Hannibal's cavalry. Varro was certainly more eager to fight, and contemporary sources put this down to inexperience, whilst describing Paulus as the more level-headed of the two. But Paulus's plan was problematic in many ways. The Roman host was very large and was composed of a mix between newly trained troops and more experienced legionaries, which made movements, maneuvers and deployments of the army a slow process, which would have been even slower in the broken ground that Paulus suggested, despite other advantages such terrain would offer. In addition, it is doubtful that Hannibal would accept a battle against a numerically superior army in a well-defended position, unsuited for his cavalry. He would have likely arrayed his troops in the plain below to taunt and challenge the Romans, and if they didn't come down from the hillsides to fight, he would use this as propaganda to show off the Republic's weakness to its Italian allies.
Wow.
Worse, Paulus's plan to move into the hills to the west meant that the Romans would perhaps be forced to wait until an opportunity for a battle arose, and that could have potentially kept the army in the field for a long time. Feeding and supplying so many troops for a prolonged period would have been a major problem, whilst Hannibal now held the most important supply depot in the area at Cannae, and could afford to wait. In addition, it is unlikely that Paulus completely refused the idea of giving battle on the flat terrain, because just like Varro, he understood that the Roman camp was already too close to Hannibal. Therefore, repositioning to the western hills would essentially require them to disengage. But any withdrawal from the field in the face of the enemy was very difficult and dangerous, especially for an army dominated by infantry that faced superior cavalry, who could pick them off piecemeal and potentially cause a rout. Furthermore, despite being in open country, retreating from an outnumbered enemy would be deeply dispiriting for the troops, especially given that the Senate, the army, and the people of Rome wanted to fight and destroy Hannibal. In every sense, the Roman army was now committed and could not easily pull away from the field without a battle. Therefore, whatever misgivings Paulus had, Varro's preference to fight as soon as possible was not at all unreasonable under the circumstances. The two consuls came from very different backgrounds. Paulus was the grandfather of Scipio Aemilianus, who was the principal financier of the famous Greek historian Polybius, the main contemporary source for the Second Punic War. Being paid by Paulus's immensely influential and wealthy family, it is easy to see why Polybius portrayed the consul in such a positive light, claiming that it was he who solely raised the morale of the army and made major efforts to organize the newly formed legions, whilst mentioning Varro only in passing as his colleague, not including him in his writings at all during the campaign until Hannibal was cited. And even then, Varro is portrayed as somewhat of an inexperienced hothead, in contrast to the supposedly more sensible Paulus. This can make it difficult to separate propaganda from the truth. However, it is true that Paulus had more military experience, having previously served as consul in 219 BC and was campaigning in Illyria. But after being involved in a scandal with the distribution of war plunder, he was keen to avoid further stains on his reputation during his second consulship in 216 BC,
pressure, then.
Which may have been part of the reason for his cautiousness prior to the battle. In military terms, the Illyrian War was a combined operation between the navy and the army, but there were no pitched battles. So despite the demands this campaign must have had on Paulus as a general, the conflict in Illyria did not require the skills needed for controlling a massive field army. And since his reputation was embellished in contemporary sources, we have no reliable way of knowing how good of a commander he was. In contrast, Varro was a novus homo, a new man, one of the very few in any generation of Roman political circles to be the first in their family to reach high office. Contemporary sources further smear him by describing his ancestry as humble and poor, claiming that his father was a butcher and that Varro himself worked in the shop during his youth. Despite being described as a brutish simpleton, in reality a new man needed substantial political ability to win elections against opponents from old prominent Roman families and their many clients who voted for them. Varro could not parade the achievements and high status of his ancestors and had to find other ways of making his name known to the public in a voting system that heavily favored the rich, which in a way made him an underdog. This shows that Varro must have been a shrewd politician who managed to gain the support of influential aristocrats and senators, all of whom looked to invest in a candidate that would aggressively confront Hannibal, a desire that was widespread in all political circles in Rome. In addition, changes to Roman laws in 217 BC made it nearly impossible for a consular candidate without military experience to be elected, regardless of the influence and prestige of his financiers. So while Varro never held senior command, considering the serious crisis that Rome was in at this stage of the war, it is reasonable to assume that he could not have been made consul without certain military qualifications. On the second day came Varro's turn to command. He led the army towards a position closer to the enemy, despite objections from his colleague. Hannibal responded by sending out groups of cavalry and light infantry to harass and slow down the advancing enemy column. Seeing the incoming Carthaginians, Varro closed ranks and the column only barely continued to move forward. A series of skirmishes caused significant confusion in the Roman ranks, but Varro's formed close order infantry drove back each attack. The sporadic fighting went on until dark, without either side gaining an edge or inflicting losses on the enemy. But the Roman progress to a new campsite slowed down to a crawl because they were forced to maintain a constant fighting line, eventually encamping when night fell. Paulus, still supposedly reluctant to give battle in this terrain, took charge of the army next morning and continued the advance towards the site chosen for the main camp, marshalling the troops to close the distance with the Carthaginians. Meanwhile, Hannibal was still positioned on high ground near Cannae, south of the river, observing enemy movements without taking any action. The Romans proceeded to aggressively take control over the battlefield. 2/3 of the army remained in the main camp, while the remaining 1/3 of the troops was sent across the river Aufidius.
Wow.
Setting up a second camp showed the determination of the Roman leadership to put pressure on the movement of enemy troops, whilst taking up a position from where they could protect their own foraging parties that ventured close to Cannae. More importantly, this aggressive stance served to build up the confidence of the troops. Hannibal countered by advancing down from the high ground towards a new camp location, most likely the flat plateau atop a ridge west of the main Roman camp, leaving a garrison to guard the fortified depot at Cannae. The size of the Roman host was clearly on his mind as he continuously spoke to the men, encouraging them that this is why they came to Italy. Challenging the Romans for control over the battlefield showed Hannibal's belief in victory, which raised the spirits of the men. The new camp was in a fairly good defensive position, overlooking the plain below, with the river nearby offering the crucial water supply.
Wow.
On the last day of July, the Carthaginian general ordered the troops to prepare for battle. The camp was abuzz for much of the late afternoon, as the men sharpened their blades, cleaned their weapons, armor and clothing, wanting to look their best and most intimidating once the battle commenced. Early on August the 1st, the Carthaginian army marched out of their camp. On the Roman side, Paulus was once again in command. He posted covering forces in front of the palisades of each camp, but the legions stayed close to the ramparts and little was done to provoke a battle. Hannibal, meanwhile, took the initiative and dispatched his Numidians across the river to attack the secondary Roman camp. He kept the rest of the troops arrayed for battle, facing the enemy camp for several hours. He exploited Paulus's reluctance to give battle to raise the confidence of his troops by impressing upon them that the Romans lacked the will to fight. Across the river, the Numidians...
Some people do forget that propaganda, even just like simple worded propaganda, and like, you know, the right moment, like Hannibal's like saying to his troops they're too much of a coward to come out of their camps and fight a real battle. But it'll be interesting to see how well this little attack down here goes towards the secondary base.
Were ordered not to press the camp directly, but to harass the foraging parties, mostly consisting of servants gathering water supplies, and chase them from the field. For Hannibal, this was another way to humiliate the Romans and show to his troops the inability of the enemy to counter the Numidian raid and protect their foragers. Some of the Roman officers felt ashamed with how the day went, resolutely wanting to turn things around, and the troops were especially displeased with the delay. Undoubtedly, the two consuls read the mood of the camp. And on August 2nd, Varro decided to fight.
That'll be an interesting episode to see. So anyway, I couldn't really say much about this episode. Like, well, I couldn't say much anyway. So looks like the next one's going to be the actual battle itself. So it'll be interesting to see whether it'll be another victory for Hannibal, or this time the Romans will come out on top. So anyway, I can't really say much more. If you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next